What's your I finally met my online friend horror story? I met a guy online. We really got on and he came over a few times so we could hang out. I did find him attractive and tried to hint that I was into him. Note, I can't flirt to save my life, but nothing ever happened. After a few dates he suddenly vanished offline. No social media. He wasn't answering texts or emails. Nothing. I thought he'd ghosted me. After 6 months he reappears. I asked him where he'd been and he said I don't want to talk about it. A few weeks after, there was a fad where people were googling their names and posting humorous stories they had found about similar people with their name. Mine was about a ship that had my initials. And I started to Google friends' names just out of boredom, morbid curiosity. Googled his name and found a local news story from his area. One of those crime and courts things that he had been done for statutory rape of a minor, online grooming, and had his computer and phone seized as evidence. You dodged a big bullet. Guy I knew in college met a girl online and spent every day talking about her. She lived about 6 hours away, so he planned to take a semester off and pursue this relationship. He got a job in her town and asked if I'd help him move out there since my car would hold more than he could take on a bus. I had a long weekend off and figured, why not? A road trip could be fun. I'd drive him out as a goodbye present, and the way back I planned to visit Yellowstone. Well, we arrive and it turns out he doesn't have an apartment lined up and he found a job posting in his girlfriend's town. He hadn't actually gotten the job or even applied yet. I make a bunch of phone calls and find him a room to rent that will let him move in that day with just first, last, and deposit, even without a job. I'm tired and disgusted with his lack of planning, but figure it's worth staying the night and trying to end things on good terms with my buddy. Then he breaks down and confesses that he hasn't actually met this girl. The nights he spent video chatting with her were really just him watching her vlog and jacking it. They've never talked, never texted, never even emailed. Heck, he's never even left so much as a comment or like on one of her videos. She genuinely didn't, still doesn't, know he existed. His plan was to hang out at this game shop she talks a lot about until she showed up and somehow create a relationship from that. He thought that they'd meet and she'd fall in love with him and move back to our college town to marry him. All before the next semester began. That didn't happen. Instead, I made my buddy buy a bus ticket for his ride back to school and left. He came back to school and got more cringy, not less. I lost track of him after that. Said he was 14. Turns out he was 38. My parents gave him a stern talking to. Born on a leap year obviously. This is way back in the mid-90s. Bulletin board systems were all the rage. I made friends with this guy from NC. He was friends with a bunch of us from my dorm, mostly females, which should probably have been a red flag, but I was extremely naive at the time. A couple months in, he mentioned he was coming to our state for a wedding and asked if he could come by our college to meet everyone. It was agreed he'd sleep in my dorm room since my roommate was almost never around. Now, there was no discussion or thought of sex, but I was pretty excited to meet this guy and see if he was as funny and charming as he was online. Well, day arrives, dude shows up. I should mention that I and all my college friends were 18 or 19. This guy was 24, or so he said. Guy looked like, and I'm not exaggerating, a cancer patient. Pale, gaunt features, long greasy pale blonde hair except where he was bald on top, and just generally looked like he was about to die or he was dressed as a ghoul for Halloween. He insisted on hugging all of us. I was trying to remind myself that looks don't matter and that he was a cool guy despite his very unsettling appearance. But then, when we all started hanging out, things just got worse. He was asking really invasive questions of all of us, making weird comments to whatever was said, just all around creepy and distressing. I was sitting on the floor with another friend and actively rocking back and forth from discomfort. I lied and said I had hurt my back and that sleeping on the floor helped, because that night he kept insisting we could share my tiny twin college bed. Nope. Last time I ever met anyone from that site. I know I wouldn't have slept that night. A guy in a forum for a specific hobby would talk to me a lot, but never revealed his real identity, until out of the blue he suddenly asked me to please come to see him in hospital, where he died a few weeks later. That's kinda super sweet. Dude just wanted a friend, not pity. He and I were part of the same forum many years ago. He He was dealing with his issues and I was dealing with mine. I think we both went there to escape, where people wouldn't judge. Also, because we were bored. I'm not quite sure when we got properly talking. I think it's when he told a terrible joke about kipper ties. We used to share everything with each other, over MSN. I'd give him advice about his love life and he'd listen to all my frick-ups. It took quite a few frick-ups before we eventually met up. I think I already knew we were in love, but seeing him in person really cemented it. We decided to give it a go. Even though we lived 300 miles away from each other, we had a lot of ups and downs. I was distant. He lived with his ex-girlfriend for a bit even though she didn't have a job and couldn't afford her half of the rent. The same ex-GF who I'd given him advice on, who he had nicknamed Trouble and liked to claim she was pregnant every so often. We got over that, along with many other things, and finally moved in with each other. I thought our issues were gonna be solved when there was no distance between us. Ends up, we were just very different people who wanted very different things and the distance wasn't gonna change that. We broke up after 3.5 years together. None of that's the horror story. Not the way he treated me. Not the fact he probably cheated on me. Not that I wasn't a priority and used to cry myself to sleep. About 1.5 years after breaking up, he gets back in touch and we talk like it was in the beginning, when we were friends. After a few weeks, he asked if I want to get back together. I said no. I told him that he'd broken my heart again. The next day, I got a phone call from his work because I was still his emergency contact asking me if I knew where he was because he hasn't turned up. The police got in touch too. The last phone call that day was from his mum, to let me know that he'd killed himself. I've been active in numerous online communities over the years, and have been fortunate enough to hang out with many of the friends I've made there in person. There's only been one incident I couldn't cope with. He picked me up at the airport, which was very nice of him, and as soon as we got into the car, he started picking his nose. There's a lot that goes through your mind when you hop into a vehicle with someone you've never been alone with and you immediately catch them 2 knuckles deep in their rostrum. I looked quickly away so that he wouldn't know I caught him and be embarrassed if he was just trying to sneak one out before I noticed. If he did notice, he didn't seem embarrassed, so I relaxed a little. I guessed maybe he was just so confident about himself and our friendship that he'd ascended past caring if I saw him take care of a quick boog. Fine, sure. When I finally looked back at him, he was wiping his fingers across his dashboard. To this day I'm not really sure what to think, but this guy spent the entirety of the few hours we were together scooping out boogers and wiping them off on parts of his car or the table or wherever it was that we'd stopped at. I realized I was being transported in a rolling booger shrine and that there was nothing I could touch without needing to wash my hands. I was sitting on a crust of fossilized booger stuff. I had to be. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. He was a nice dude, but I wound up ollieing out of our visit early because I couldn't handle it. I don't consider myself a clean freak, but as wiping started to stack it was all I could do not to throw open the passenger door and roll myself out into traffic to escape. I still wonder if I should have done or said anything to save him some grief in the future, but it didn't feel like it was my place. You know? What do you even say? Wow, that really is a hilarious lack of self-awareness. This is more of an embarrassment story. When I was in high school in the 90s, I was active on the local dial-up BBS scene. I was friends with someone who went by the handle Venus. I knew she was a woman but had no idea what she looked like. I also knew she was dating a guy in real life with a handle Lord Gumby who was also a friend online. Being a socially misadjusted 15-year-old, I had a crush on her anyway, even though I knew they were both like 18. This was like 1992, so privacy wasn't as big a concern and they knew my address. This was also when people would randomly come by your house to see if you were home. That's unfathomable today. So one Saturday morning I'm at home on my computer totally disheveled, unshowered, and just gross in ratty sweatpants and no shirt. I hear a knock on the front door and go open it. There's a woman who was incredibly beautiful standing there and she just goes, "Hi, I'm Venus." I stood there for a minute. It seemed like jaw dropped trying to say something when Lord Gumby walked up and was like, "Hey doofus, ever met a woman before?" Needless to say, I wanted to sink into a hole in the ground and die, but I hung out with them and I guess I wasn't too horrible because we hung out a lot after that. But that whole time I was like, frick, my life choices, haven't talked to them in decades. I wonder how they are doing. You should find out if they're still around. They sounded like decent people in 1992. Not a horror story, but about a year after I made the move from Massachusetts to South Carolina, I was playing video games and a guy on my team talked about how he just moved into a house in the same area that I moved from. So I PM'd him and turns out that he moved into my old place and was playing in my old room with his desk in the same spot I had mine. Whoa, this one isn't creepy but probably the strangest one I've read so far. Back during WoW's second expansion, there was this guy in my guild I'd become friends with mostly through other friends. We talked more and more over time and became fairly close. He had this butthole roommate, and I could hear the guy sometimes, especially when something went wrong during a raid. He'd scream and throw fits. He was pretty awful sounding. My friend told me he wasn't just loud and obnoxious, but verbally and sometimes physically abusive, too. I had my own apartment, so I said, you know what, come stay with me, just long enough to get you on your feet and into a place that's safe. He showed up at my place with a trash bag full of his stuff and a laptop. I set him up in the apartment and started trying to help him find a job. Well, he did not want a job. He did not get a job either. He sat in my apartment, day after day, eating my food and slowly draining my savings. No matter how hard I tried to get him motivated, he would just dig in his heels and somehow become more sedentary. Eventually I told him he had to go. I couldn't afford to keep him there. He was just couch surfing. I spoke to some people and eventually pieced together that his method of securing a new temporary place was playing on the sympathies of his friends to convince them he was in a terrible living situation. It just worked really well on me because he had that loud, obnoxious roommate to play off of. He wound up calling a nearby relative to come and get him, I think his aunt. I don't know what he told her I supposedly did, but I have never seen a more venomous look from someone in my life. As far as I know, he moved in with his sister and brother-in-law after that, but frankly I don't care where he ended up. He also stole a bunch of my stuff. First and last time I do anything like that. It's bizarre to me that some folks see other people as means to an end and not human beings deserving of basic respect. I'm sorry to hear that happen to you. Don't let it dim your shine. We were both in our early teens and had already met in person one time before at a public event. We decided to meet up again, but at her house this time. In the short span of time I was over there, I watched her physically attack her mom and bust a door. I mean, I was already aware of some home problems, but I was not prepared to get caught up in the middle of it immediately. Met this dude on EverQuest and we've played games together ever since. Been a part of the same guild, help each other out on mobile games, and have conversations about life in general. It isn't him that's the horror story, it was his mom. So one day, I think we were playing WoW at the time, I log on to do some quests. Suddenly his user comes on and asks to chat by video. We've done this before and there's no problem, but after I click to start the video chat, there's his mom butt naked on the screen. She asks me to watch her masturbate and I'm like, no lady, this is just awkward AF, and I log off for a few days. I get an email from my friend and he wants to know why I haven't shown up for quests or anything. So I tell him what happened and he is seriously like, WTF. Turns out his mom had been doing this to a lot of his online buddies and she eventually goes to prison for raping a minor or two. Buddy's doing great though, wife and kids, plus we still play the occasional game together. Holy crap. I'm glad he turned out alright and that she went to jail. I never actually met the guy, but spoke to him on the phone. We'd met on MySpace when I was in college and exchanged email addresses when we realized we lived in the same town. Eventually, I gave him my phone number and made plans for him to call me. When he did, his voice creeped me out. It was how I imagined a serial killer would sound. By the time I got past it and was comfortable talking to him on the phone, I started noticing other red flags. Whenever I brought the neighborhood up, he changed the subject. At one point, I asked him what his favorite restaurant on the boulevard was and he hedged, so I made up a restaurant that I said was my favorite. He immediately said that was his favorite too and that he especially loved one of their dishes. He went on and on about this wonderful place that didn't exist, and there wasn't a similar one in town, so he couldn't be confused. I called him out on the fact that he'd obviously never been to my neighborhood. Turned out, he didn't even live in the same state as me. message, like this video, but do it quietly so you don't wake up the sleeping papa. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.